Thank you, Jose, and thank you, Luis, for arranging once again that wonderful conference and having me here. What I want to do is, I want to straightforward continue where Nisa has stopped by digging deeper into the book business. And in the book business, we see a number of transformative elements which are driven in part by exactly the topics that Nisa has started to approach. And what I want to do specifically is to run you through a few questions regarding the transformation of the book publishing industry, about how the consumer, how we read, is changing, how there is a widening gap between a very conservative industry on the one hand, which insists on their traditional business models and their way to produce and distribute books on the one hand, and very, very strongly changing, shifting consumer and reader behavior on the other side. And then I conclude with a few more detailed observations about ebooks as one part of the digital transformation. The starting point is always, for me, one of these slides where we see book publishing is very specific. It is not a level playing field, but just 7 markets: the United States, China, Germany, United Kingdom, Japan, France, and India have over 2/3 of the entire book publishing market worldwide. All the other countries combined have another 1/3. The second very paradox situation is the revenue made out of publishing books and selling it to readers in France is roughly equivalent to that of India, despite the discrepancy of France having 50 million people and India having 1.3 billion, as we know. Why is this so? Because books are very specifically focusing on a well-educated, affluent audience in primarily urban situations, which have certain social and cultural aspirations, and you need to afford to have these aspirations, and these populations are fairly having the same number of people in India as in France. So we are in a very, I hate to use the word, but it is a fact, elitist industry, and we need to acknowledge this. When we look at how the entire industry, the market size, developed over the past 10 years, and when we realistically factor in inflation, we see that almost all the markets, the largest markets even, the strongest markets, have been declining continuously. Only China is standing out by its growth, which again echoes the economic dynamics. So even when we speak about culture, in fact, we need to frame culture in the wider context of the economy. What makes the life of the book people more difficult, though, is on the one hand, that's the downward, the dotted lines, the markets go down, but, and we have 3 examples, all of the EU as portrayed by the Federation of European Publishers, Germany as the largest European market, and France as another big market. The markets go down, but the output of titles, the number of new titles released every year, is going up still in most markets, only Germany being an exception, where realistically the industry said, when we don't earn more money, we cannot roll out more titles. And having the widening gap means that per book, it is more and more difficult to make money, to make it profitable. The average revenue, the average print run of books is going down, and the individual publisher and the individual author, on average, of course, earns less. The situation, however, is not the same in every country. we see when we look at three main categories, like children's books, including textbooks for school, and non-fiction and fiction, we see huge differences between countries. That chart had been given to me by Nielsen Bookscan in London. You see, for instance, the amount of fiction read in Italy is way more as compared to India, but also as compared to Australia. The number of non-fiction, which includes most of the educational material, is massive in India or in Brazil, and it is not so big in Spain or in Italy. So you see again that books and reading and learning and looking for knowledge depends on the economical and cultural aspiration in a given country, and the developing economy where people only start to form middle-class readerships are behaving totally different as compared to our mature markets in Western Europe. But what is changing much more dramatically is the way how we read. When you look to the right-hand side, that's one of my favorite pictures. It's from the early 15th century, early Renaissance in Florence, in Italy. The painter Fra Angelico has portrayed all the life of Christ and all those crucial situations that we know from the Bible. At the moment, right before the printing press had been invented, when books have started to become popular. And you see that monk on the right-hand corner who is really deep into reading. Reading at the beginning was to be immersed, to be absorbed by the book, to have a one and unique experience. And we continue 500 years later to think that this is the classical or the even only viable way to read in a meaningful way. But in fact, when we look today at Generation Y, but also Z, as we have seen, the situation is totally different in two ways. On the one hand, people are reading on devices which not only give you access to books, but to anything that you want, social media, interaction with others. So it's not an isolated, immersive experience anymore necessarily. It can be, but it's not the only way. It's also a very strong socially contextualized activity where you exchange things, not through media, to discover books. You don't need a newspaper with a review, but you are in the peer group and you flock together, and the boundary is blurring between you being a target audience and you exchanging, being a fan. A fan is a different thing than the monk reading in the Holy Bible, being immersed in meditation, etc., etc. So that is a dramatic change in our behavior. We have no idea exactly what that will bring about, but we must recognize that we are at this tipping point where that is shifting. And so when the publishing industry does ignore this, it will become more and more niche, because those new territories will be governed only by other industries and other media formats and other players. We have seen mobile has become to rule the world. And we see here, unsurprisingly, and that's another chart from the Global Web Index data given to me, fortunately, given permission to me to show this. We see millennials are going after everything mobile first. But even the traditional readers start to have, in a massive way, 18% across all communities, to have a very strong mobile-first behavior. And if you compare over time, over several years, you see that even the orange line displaying the traditional readers, they are catching up. They are at a lower level, but the trend is exactly the same as for the youngest cohort. Now, not only in the reader behavior, but also in the industry, which is catering to these audiences and which is supporting or taking advantage of this behavior, we see that book publishing has become a fairly tiny cohort of players by comparison to other media. On the left-hand side, you see HarperCollins, Penguin Random House, or Pearson, three of the largest globally active publishing groups with their revenues between 1.5 billion euros and 5.3 billion euros for Pearson. But even Netflix is today, by revenue, after very few years of a real boom of video subscription services, is bigger than the largest publishing companies, not to compare with Disney or Amazon. And when we look at Amazon, it's not just a distributor, it has become a publisher. We have no numbers, but like a rule of thumb, I would say Amazon publishing, yeah, just what they do with Kindle Direct Publishing and their own publishing imprints would position them among the 20 largest book publishers in the conventional sense. So that is a changing landscape. And that has one effect. It is not just about rolling out a book, as it used to be, and then you will find a book retailer, a bookshop, to sell it for you to a consumer who will discover it exclusively in the bookshop. It has become an engine, a virtuous circle where you need to find your place in a very dynamic thing where a book is just becoming a part of between other media content that needs to be embraced directly by communities of users, and they will not only absorb the book content as consumers, they will also very actively impact back on the business of books, self-publishing being just one example where that feeds directly into a new way of producing new books. What does this mean in terms of market patterns? We have a few fairly complicated and paradox situations right now. On the one hand, this is a chart which portrays how the top bestsellers, the blockbuster books like Twilight, Shades of Grey, or Stieg Larsson's Millennium series are performing by comparison to all of the rest. And we see that per year, over a 10-year period in 8 markets, only 3, 4, 5 books every year stand out like a skyscraper against all of the rest. So there is a little tiny cutout of the book industry which leaves behind everybody else. But here comes the paradox. If you widen that bestseller cohort to the 100 strongest books, the red lines are how they performed in their market share among the 100 in Kobo's ebook sales. You see they were less in market share in 2016 as compared to 3 years earlier. That means you have a very strong specialization in 2 dimensions. On the one hand, the very, very top blockbusters from the previous chart on the one hand, but also this long tail. You have ever more books competing for those economically interesting, relevant ranges of the top 100 or top 500 books, which makes it, again, more difficult for the traditional publishers to find, in all that diversity, their place to position themselves. And that is even reinforced by another factor, and that is Amazon. personally, I have no problem in pronouncing that name. Amazon is one of the most important online companies worldwide. They started by selling books and have become a media company, a software company, etc. But when we look at the many charts that Amazon is bringing in its websites about books, you see that in the top fiction category and in the top ebook category, what you see in blue here is that their own output has become more relevant than what they are as a service provider, as a retailer, do for publishers. So in Amazon, as the largest retailer worldwide, Amazon has become both the most important retail channel for publishers and their fiercest competitor, which is not really a pleasant situation. Otherwise said, again, one picture from an analysis that we did very recently, a few months ago in January, based on a number of Amazon charts in 4 non-English European countries, in Germany, in France, in Italy, and in Spain. We were looking, where are books from the publishers still occupying a very strong place in the market, in the retail channel of Amazon, and we see it's only when you really look at the classical book category. As soon as you go across all categories, factoring in ebooks and audio, or when you go down more into genre, like literature and fiction, then all the romance and all the thrillers come in, and here the publishers are not anymore in control of the bestsellers. So that's what I mean by the shift in between a conservative industry on the one hand and shifting market conditions and user behavior. The problem is we know very little about the details of how that shift is going on. We are now in year 10 of the ebook times, and still for most markets, except for the English market, the English language market, for all of continental Europe, we have very little idea what is going on there. And therefore, we tried to work with ebook distributors since a year and a half, preparing for what we call an ebook trend barometer, which we will start to present in September, where we try to aggregate all the sales information for a few countries, again in Europe, on continental Europe, because we are trying to shed light in the non-English part, and try to understand what is going on in ebooks as a first step into better understanding all of digital. Just a few very quick snapshots. Here you have, okay, that's a little weird. Here you have 2 full years and the first quarter in 2018, which shows you in which month ebooks had a peak. And it shows you normally for the traditional print market that it's all about the Christmas season. It's very different for ebooks. As we have, for instance, that's what I wanted to show you here, a spike in early summer, because ebooks have become very strong in summer reading. Why? Because you don't need to carry a bag of books in your suitcase. The same when we look across price ranges, which is important to understand what are people prepared to spend on ebooks. We see fairly, I don't go into the details, don't be afraid, but that will require close reading of a report. But we will see that people have totally different price preferences in digital, lower than in print. And publishers are having significant difficulties to adjust to this. They want to stick with their pricing positions, which are way above 10 euros per title, per book. But we see also that these price preferences of the audience are different between countries. While in Germany, you can still fairly well sell ebooks at 13, 15, even 18 euros. That would be absolutely impossible, inconceivable in a place like Spain or Italy. And by going into the detail and by really trending properly and slicing and cohorting the sales data, we will understand how the landscape is shifting. Here, for instance, in a case of Germany, where price preferences are going down, which parts of the continuum are picking up, where publishers should rather place their better part of the new title output, and where they would run into a wall of users saying, oh, wait a moment, when we are on the internet with our mobile phones, we won't pay 18 euros for a book anymore. So that's what we want to make more transparent in this, and therefore we have started working, forming a group, and here again, that's the little promotional pitch in my presentation. My gratitude to Fande and all the organizations involved in making that event happen. That was the starting point, and then we were starting to work with Central Book House in the Netherlands, with Bookwire in Germany, with Edigita in Italy, Bookwire also a little bit in Spain, and from there want really to portray how at first ebooks, and hopefully very quickly afterwards also audiobooks and perhaps streaming are developing in at least 5 countries: France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain. So stay tuned, and best would be that you go to my website, visionbar.com. You can subscribe to a newsletter, and then we update you when the report is out in September. I hope I've been within my time frame. Thank you so much.